Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Young Love, Super Mario Brothers, and a Suicide. Alright, get that zoomed out there. Okay, today is kind of a complex two-step process that's plotted. This hand, I dig. This face, I kind of dig, but he's much too large for this hand, so these aren't really connected. So what I'm seeing here is this is another head, which would put that in proportion to this hand. Turn this into the shoulder, drop a shadow down here, and make this entity sort of a multi-faced, torso-headed, head-torsoed, more faces and heads emerging from it as well. So that, I'm just going to drop in a shadow like this, a translucent purple Prussian and Payne's gray mix. And then up here, I think I want a bottle with a car in it, traveling. You know, like a ship in a bottle, except a little car in a bottle. So I'm going to put that up there, but we're going to do the shadow first, and then I'll work on this line work up here, and hopefully there'll be enough time for both in one session. If not, I might splice together a couple for this process moment here, our process video. Okay, here we go.
On the left, then Kim Skates from Post Falls, Idaho, an incredible woman, mycologist. Dr. Michael Bugh, who is still alive, and my mentor, and Alexander Smith. Michael Bugh and I received a DEA license in around 1977, which persisted for about 10 years, legally allowing us to grow psilocybin mushrooms in the laboratory and collect them. And then Alexander Smith wrote a monograph on the genus psilocybe that was published as well. Now, both my father and Alexander Smith, late in their life, asked me if I would trip with them on psilocybin mushrooms. I turned them both down. Think of that. Two hugely important people in my life finally said, I want to do psilocybin mushrooms with you, Paul. The father of American mycology wrote a monograph on the genus psilocybe. He wanted to trip with me. I turned him down. I turned him down for two reasons. One, I asked, well, will your wives, will your significant others trip with you? And they both said, no, no way. I went, oh my. What happens if you have a sudden shaking of your spiritual belief system from psilocybin? I don't want to create a chasm in your relationship. And moreover, I adopted the motto, nature provides, I don't. And I take this very, very seriously. You have a moral, ethical responsibility when you give psilocybin mushrooms to someone for their experience. You own part of that experience. It's part of your karma. Think of that. It's so important. These medicines are so powerful. So I think the therapeutic model is extremely important. But at the same token, I believe in the freedom of consciousness. I believe it is a civil right that all of us should have a right to our own consciousness. I believe all of us should be able to legally possess psychoactive substances. But as soon as you pass them from one person to another, or as soon as you commercialize them, then I think there needs to be controls in place. Some of you may disagree with me, but I have seen corporeally the importance of this belief. We started doing a series of mushroom conferences. This is in 1979. The first one actually was 1978 in North Savannah State Park. We were so paranoid that the DEA was going to bust us that we actually had 130 people gathered at Evergreen State College for this conference. We advertised. We didn't tell them where it was. We hired buses, and unbeknownst to them, we took them to their location where they then disembarked on the bus. Now, Jonathan Ott was a leader of this conference. I was also a co-organizer. I kind of got kicked out. But on Friday night, they opened the conference. They got word the DEA was going to bust the conference. I've never done a public speech before. They didn't show up. I got a message, Paul, start the conference. I'm going, where are the organizers? And they were so afraid the DEA was going to show up. And since the DEA did not bust the first day of the conference, they put Paul out there. Then they showed up the next day. So I just want to let history record this, please. It was an extreme area at a time of extraordinary paranoia everywhere. So of course I became good friends with Terence McKenna, and Terence and Dennis McKenna's book with Kathleen Harrison and Jeremy Bidwood, the Austin Eric Psilocybin Field Guide, by far was the most significant book of those times in the 70s. Several of my books here. And then these conferences continue, and this conference today is a continuum of these conferences that have started in the mid to late 1970s. So this is a community, this is a continuum. And here is the 1998 in Amsterdam, there's Albert Hofmann there, myself, many of the other speakers that many of you are familiar with. And then I realized I was in a strange nexus point of knowing the very pranksters and a lot of people in the Grateful Dead community. I'm a Deadhead. And Ken Kesey and I and the family became really tight friends. And I realized that I knew the psychedelic researchers, and I also know the psychedelic cultural heroes. And so we put together at Bush Hot Springs the Millennium Mushroom Conference. 125 people showed up, 40 speakers. So this is the bus further, Ken Kesey, and there, of course, Sasha Shulgin, Andy Weil, myself, Gary Linkoff, and many other notable speakers were there. Okay, so that's some of the sort of, 70s to 80s to 90s, cultural perspective. But I just want to draw attention to several meta-studies that many of you already know about. This is from DSHS, 485,000 people surveyed. Psilocybin use was associated with a 27% reduction in larceny and theft, 22% reduced odds of property crime, 18% reduction of violent crime. So, interesting also, in a 1,266 community members surveyed between the ages 16 and 70, there was a direct negative correlation between psilocybin use and partner-to-partner violence. Statistically significant reduction in violence. Now think of this. Now people may say association is not causation. It can be both. But the narrative from the scientific community increasingly is support that there is a cause and effect relationship. Think of this. Psilocybin reduces crime. When any government officials here, we were thinking about, the stress on the economies, you think about law enforcement, the jurisprudence system, all the problems, racism for targeting minorities, all of this. And we have a substance that has a strong correlation with people becoming better law-abiding citizens, better people. I believe psilocybin makes nicer people. There's over 102 studies now at clinicaltrials.gov on psilocybin. Now that's extraordinary. They go through IRB boards, and some of the parameters are that there is a need, there's a low risk of adverse reactions or toxicity, and that is scalable, and meaning that the medicine is able to be, eventually make it through the FDA and potentially to the market. There is now 21 states that have had bills or legislation for the decriminalization or legalization of psilocybin. Sadly, not a single state considered microdosing. Now, this is something that, unfortunately, I was on the Oregon Advisory Committee. My recommendations were not accepted. This is a tragedy for the commons, and I think that you'll soon see what I mean by that. Now, Stephen Ross spoke of this with an alcohol use disorder, but there's also a tremendous association with the reduction of opioid use disorder. This has hit my family personally, something I've had to deal with for the past 10 years. I have a family member in prison right now because of this. So it's not only the victims, yes, the victims and the emanation of the tragedy and being victim of violent crime, affects family, the individual, the family, the neighbors, the community, the state, the country, the world. What was psilocybin in the pebble pond of wellness and goodness? Someone benefits from psilocybin, breaking alcohol, opioid addiction. What happens? They tell their friends, they tell their families. They're a bearer of good news. So the pebble in the pond of wellness and goodness also emanates, but even further out. So the reduction in crime is one element, but the improved mental health of society in general, I think, is an extraordinary benefit. So, Michelle and Jesse, thank you for an excellent presentation. Yes, Psilocybe cubensis is the species that's most commonly in use. We launched a microdose study at microdose.me. We have over 20,000 people. You can download it for the Droid and Apple devices. And we have launched version 2. We have just launched it in the past 2 weeks. We have over 1,000 people subscribing. I encourage you to join microdose.me if you're interested and tell your friends about it. This has all been vetted through ethics review boards to make sure that it's anonymized, the patient, the reported data is private. But this meta-analysis that we created was really stimulated by these other meta-studies, like, wow, this associations. What are people actually doing microdosing? Now let me define microdosing as being a non-intoxicating dose. Unfortunately, there's 4 or 5 articles that have come out in the peer-reviewed literature talking about microdosing, but they're microdosing. Microdosing means you do not feel an effect. There's no intoxicating effect. 0.5 grams, of Psilocybe cubensis is a sensorium effect. I think most of the people who have done that, they know you can actually feel it. So with microdosing in this definition that I'm proposing as being non-intoxicating, colors are brighter, you're in a happier mood, problems don't seem as significant, you're more creative and productive. But it's not intoxicating. So this is where it's unfortunately that microdosing has not been adopted by Oregon, and many of these other states are not considering it. They can't wrap their mind around it. Because if you want to microdose in Oregon, I'm not sure how many hours it is now, 4 to 6 hours going to a therapeutic clinic, sitting in a chair, bored out of your gourd. What the WTF, why would I want to do this? So it's totally missed, again, a potential tragedy for the commons. So we have this app here. There's many challenge tests, one for memory. You put in your password, you ask what are you microdosing, how much are you microdosing with, what are you microdosing with, and it has then challenge tests as well. It has memory tests, and the flowers light up. Can you then recall the sequence of the flowers lighting up, and vision, auditory tests, and things like this. And so we published our study with over 14,000 patients, or not patients, self-reporting microdosers. This is published in Nature Scientific Reports. The peer reviewers were so amazed at the data set was so large. And so this is a qualitative study. Why you're microdosing, what your income is, what your racial background is, why you're microdosing, what's your primary reason for microdosing. And so in there also, we had what are you microdosing and combining it with. Now I've been popularizing something called the stack, which is a combination of psilocybin mushrooms, niacin and lion's mane. Now, psilocybin mushrooms contain much more than psilocybin. Psilocybin, psilocin, baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin, arutemisin. These are all tryptamine analogs that co-occur. Again, all the studies, with the exception of 1 or 2, that have been published in clinical trials are using psilocybin the molecule, which is totally divorced from real-world use, where the majority of people in the public are not using psilocybin the molecule, they're using psilocybin mushrooms. So we propose, and working with Roland Griffiths, to do a parallel study of psilocybin mushrooms versus psilocybin the pure molecule. We're still working on that. So the standard stack became very popularized, and I chose niacin because I realized when you take niacin, you start to flush and you itch. So it excites your peripheral nervous system, and it excites your nerves. And then I realized that neuropathies oftentimes present themselves as deadening of the fingertips and the toes. And psilocybin is a vasoconstrictor. Niacin is a vasodilator. And then lion's mane, there's 4 clinical trials that have been published. I popularized a website for researchers and physicians at mushroomreferences.com. You can look all this up. And lion's mane has been shown to contain erinacines. These are compounds that stimulate the remyelination on the axons of nerves. And demyelination, amyloid plaques, etc., of course, have been implicated with Alzheimer's. So that was studied, and then this article came out also on alcohol use disorder. I think most of you all are familiar with that, and Stephen actually talked about it as well. So the majority of people are using a microdose, which is a low dose, and it's less than 0.1 grams. With the 10 is we give 1 milligram of psilocybin. 1 gram of psilocybin is equivalent to 10 milligrams at 1%. So 1/10 of a gram of psilocybin is 1 milligram. And the majority of people are in this low to medium dose. 88% of the respondents are truly in a microdose realm. So we did a follow-up report that was published in Scientific Reports in the Nature publication June 30th of this year. Now, our preliminary data, which has not been published, showed a strong decrease in anxiety and depression using the stack. We also saw it with psilocybin. The degree of significance was greater with the stack, but it gets into that fuzzy realm that it's so significantly reduced. And then the critics came out. Well, this is not a placebo-controlled study. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It's an observational study. People are not going to be motivated to microdose and then take a placebo, right? They're microdosing because they're taking the psilocybin. So it kind of blows our mind when some of these critics, they really didn't think through this very well. But a valid criticism that we accepted was expectancy. It's not placebo, it's expectancy. You're hoping that you have a benefit from microdosing, so you expect, because of the popularity of it, that you have a reduction in these symptoms. Indeed, we saw that. But in my dialogue with Dr. Pram Crisco, we helped co-design the microdose study. I was very sensitive to this concept of placebo or expectancy, and we both decided we need to get in a psychomotor test that's beyond expectancy. Not something that's subjective, but something you can actually physically demonstrate. Does psilocybin microdosing benefit people? And we've zeroed in on the finger tapping test. It is used for Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's patients, progressive dementia, traumatic brain injury. I have a friend whose husband fell off of a roof, hit his head, and she goes, yeah, they do the tap test. How many times you can tap your fingers in 10 seconds? When you're 22, you can do a lot faster than when you're 82. Because a sad fact of life is neurodegeneration is age-related and progressive over time. So the tapping test is a challenge test, and we ask it at the baseline. And admittedly, people get practiced initially for the first 3 times they do it. I think they can hit a threshold maximum. So the tapping test has been used, and there's well over 100 publications in the scientific literature, specifically related to neurodegeneration using this test. It's very convenient, it's arithmetically translatable, and when we got the results back, actually, I didn't get the results back. The statisticians on our team, Zach Walsh and Joe Rootman being one of them, I got the message that we have some data back, we're kind of shocked by it, we don't want to share it with you until we acid test it. And so they did. They hit it with 3 different analytical systems of analysis, statistically, and the results came to be true. So I had no insight to this data whatsoever until the data was revealed. We published this in Nature June 30th of this year, and these are the results. Psilocybin in any form had no significant increase in the frequency and the cadence of tapping in 30 days with microdosing. But the combination of psilocybin microdosing with niacin and lion's mane had an enormous effect. The p-value of significance is 0.004. That means there's 1 chance in 250. Actually, the p-value is 0.001. But then they threw out some outliers and reduced it to 0.004. 1 chance in 250. That this is just noise. That this is not, a cause and effect relationship. So we saw that, wow, we have a psychomotor benefit that's outside of subjectivity, expectancy. There's no possible, talking to other statisticians, they twist themselves in pretzels trying to figure out how is it possible to have an expectancy benefit in 55-plus-year-olds. with expectancy with a tap test. So we thought, okay, we have something here. Now, the previous speaker talked mechanism and modes of action. That's something we're really, really interested in. So we started looking at neuroreceptors. And we studied the literature. I have 10 full-time research scientists, 5 PhDs, who have also published on psilocybin in the scientific literature. And so I tasked them, okay, let's go ahead and let's dig into neuroreceptors. And so we went into a whole bunch of neuroreceptors, but the ones we really want to focus on are MAP kinases. They're track A, track B, and track C. And these code for neurogeneration. Basically, these are receptor proteins which, when there's binding affinity to it, stimulate neurogrowth factors or brain-derived neurotropic factors or other ways of stimulating neuronal outgrowth, forking, and also helping atrophying nerves being able to become alive again, to regrow. We also looked at some other receptors that are related to neuroanti-inflammatories, JAK1s. So when we combine psilocin and niacin, we found synergy. Now, synergy is beyond the cumulative additive effects. The individual components have some signal, the other component has another signal. The cumulative additive effect you see there is in red and blue. But the synergistic effect, in this case, of psilocin and niacin on track A is 4.8 and 6.4. So that's surprising, that's interesting, unexpected. So we then looked at lion's mane. Well, let's add lion's mane psilocin and niacin together, and we found something that was a new term of art for me. It's called maximum calculable value. It's when each of these components have no activity whatsoever, but the three of them strung together have massive synergy. And notice it is at the microdosing level. So this is down to 1/25th of a tenth of a gram. So we started looking at other things, and we thought, let's look at the psilocybin analogs that co-occur. Let's like norpsilocin and niacin on track A's. Again, maximum calculable value. No effect with psilocin at these concentrations, again, at the microdosing levels. So then we looked at norbaeocystin and niacin. All of these terpenes are co-occurring in psilocybe cubensis that are being consumed. Again, we have a massive synergistic effect. Most exciting to me.
All right, so that gets car on a bottle. A shadow man in proportion to the hand. His torso a face, another face emerging out of sort of his neck area. And I'll probably do some in the lower portion of the figure, of a shadow figure as well. Direct in some shadows around little figure here and these guys, and give the bottle a little shadow in accordance with the sunset light source. Those all need a lot more work, but that gets, I think, all of the elements that are going to be in this painting placed. Now it's just a matter of modeling and doing some detail and shadow work. So that's it for the moment. Thank you for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting, Young Love, Super Mario Brothers, and a suicide. There's that. The start of it anyway. Kind of looks like a micro machine or some kind of little shrunk toy car. I dig it. It kind of goes with the sort of toyish, playful, figurative work throughout the rest of the painting as well. With the hand providing enough realism and contrast to make a focal point. And that's going to be modeled a lot more too. But that's it for now. So thanks again. Have a good day.